Caesar salad was invented in 1924. It was invented by the owner of a famous Tijuana restaurant, which was flourishing during the American Prohibition. You realize that when they couldn't serve alcohol in the U.S., people made extra trips south of the border. Caesar Cardini wanted to impress all of the celebrities that were trekking south from Los Angeles to visit his very elite restaurant and bar just across the Mexican border in Tijuana. And so he threw together a few raw eggs into the romaine, and then he added a little bit of garlic flavoring, garlic flavored croutons, and some Parmesan, and of course, what else do you know what went in there? Anchovies, and out came Caesar salad. For many of us, this could just as well be the Caesar to whom the Apostle Paul made his famous appeal. And if it is not this Caesar, perhaps it is that other Caesar that we all like to think of. He sells pizza down at 51st Avenue and Baseline. Pretty good deal on him too. Or maybe it's the other guy that is the Caesar in our lives. He's down on South Las Vegas Boulevard, and he provides the ultimate dining and entertainment center on the Strip. Caesar's Palace. For most of us, our first inclination is to identify Caesar with food, dining, entertainment, and the good life. But for the first century person, the mere mention of Caesar was enough to make a person shake in his boots or shake in his sandals. The Apostle Paul had been incarcerated and interrogated for 2 years in the provincial capital of Caesarea, and it was at that point that he finally felt compelled to appeal to the emperor, who was the Caesar. It was not a step to be taken lightly, because he knew that if he stood before the emperor, before Caesar, his chances of walking free were a lot slimmer than if he were to continue cooling his heels in the local slammer. Besides, the local governor, Felix, or at least the previous governor, Felix, had been pretty transparent. And by the way, transparent is the English power word of the day. If something is transparent, you can see through it. Glass is transparent. We also use the term to talk about people when their motives or their intentions are obvious. They are transparent. When you can see exactly what somebody is up to or exactly what somebody is thinking, we would say they are transparent. So the governor Felix was transparent. What he was doing politically in keeping Paul in jail was very obvious. And Paul knew how to deal with Felix. But then a new governor rotated in, a guy named Festus. And he was a much more mysterious character. He was more matter of fact. He was more businesslike. Felix was willing to let the dispute between Paul and the Jewish leaders go on for 2 years. That messiness did not bother him at all. Festus, on the other hand, did not like the idea of having this unresolved situation hanging over him. His attitude was more of, well, let's get on with this. Let's resolve this thing one way or the other. Get him out of my jail. Get it, You know how it is with some people? They can't stand loose ends, unresolved problems. Felix used the messiness of his political advantage, or to his political advantage. But Festus was not that creative. He was more rigid. He liked things in the slots, the proper slots. He wasn't a creative, free-floating guy. And he wanted resolution. And Paul quickly saw that as this resolution was about to come, that it was not going to be resolution in his favor or in his way. It looked pretty clear to Paul that the new governor was going to transfer him back to Jerusalem to face a Jewish trial, or a trial in that setting. But of course, Paul also knew that he would never make it back to Jerusalem, if you catch his drift. And that is the context for Paul's great statement in verse 11. I appeal to Caesar. I appeal to Caesar, which is actually a technical legal term in here. And Festus, more than happy to get Paul out of his jurisdiction, replied, problem solved, very well. You have appealed to Caesar, and to Caesar you will go. Caesar, of course, is the Roman emperor. He's not the salad. He's not the pizza guy. He's not the Las Vegas guy. And at that point in AD 58 or so, the Caesar would have been an unstable fellow by the name of Nero. Although Nero was still so new to the job and so new to his office that he had not yet had a chance to develop his cruel reputation. So he was kind of an unknown as well. And that is, in sum, what is happening in Acts 25 in our passage this morning. So instead of accepting another regional change of venue, Paul is appealing his case to the emperor's court, which happened to be in Rome. And I want to, this morning, highlight or note 4 dimensions of that story. I want to make 4 observations that I believe are reflective of the point or points that Luke, the writer of Acts, is making here and that he is trying to convey to us. And I think that you will find them at least somewhat applicable in various ways in your own life. First of all, I want you to note the irony of pagan protection while the people of God plotted to kill the messenger of God. Note the irony of pagan protection while the people of God plotted to kill the messenger of God. Paul is appealing to Caesar. Even the kindest Caesar was corrupt, was hideous by our standards. There was nothing godly about the Roman government or the Roman Caesar. True, the government provided a level of stability and prosperity that was unparalleled in history, but it was not out of their desire to please God that they did all of this. It was purely political. It was a functional necessity in order to hold this huge empire together that they conquered. And so this was a society that was characterized by abortion and infanticide and euthanasia, and political murder was common as dirt. That was how you removed the people. You didn't call for a new election. You just removed them through a knife. The spiritual condition of the Jewish people was such that Paul had to make his appeal to a detestable foreign emperor. And Luke wants us to see that Israel had essentially abandoned God. Even the temple, the great symbol of God's presence with his people, even the temple was corrupt. The temple leaders, after all, were the ones who were plotting to kill God's messenger of the good news. As Luke was writing his book, Jerusalem and the temple was on the verge of destruction, as had been predicted by Jesus. or likely it had already been destroyed in the year 70. The exact date of the publication of Acts is not clear, but the first readers of Acts would have seen this ongoing plot against Paul and against the church as a precursor to judgment on the temple. They would have connected the dots. Now it's likely too that this account was compiled after the death of Paul. Paul died in the year 67 in Rome. He was eventually beheaded by Nero, although some scholars believe that he was actually acquitted in Nero's court following this appeal, and that he then went on to Spain to preach in Spain. They're pulling little pieces of history together, weaving them together to try to get this account. But then he was rearrested again in Rome and eventually martyred at the hand of Nero. We don't know for sure about the timeline and all that. But what is clear is that the Jewish people had become so politicized and so secularized that they and the pagan Roman emperor were really cut from the same mold at that point in history. They were on the same side. And this in Acts is a warning that religiosity in and of itself does not guarantee that you will end up any better than Caesar. And that's ironic. Secondly, I want you to note that Paul took advantage of his citizenship. Only a citizen could appeal his case to the emperor. It was his right as a citizen to make that appeal. And while Paul was not especially excited about going to see the emperor, when necessary, he used the means that had been given to him. Most early Christians were not Roman citizens. Most early Christians were probably in the slave category. And they would not have had the avenue of appeal. It was an unusual gift for him to use. It is, as is the gift of citizenship that we ourselves have. There are lots of people without the benefits of citizenship in such a country as ours. James called me Tuesday afternoon, Lewa's husband. He was all excited because he's been sworn in as a U.S. citizen. Yeah, that's exciting. So to celebrate, their family went out to a big Chinese New Year celebration that night. Which is cool because the strength of our nation is the fusion of new cultures. New people coming from China and coming from Mexico and coming from Africa and all over the place. It's the fusion of these cultures that makes us strong. That is so American when you think about it. And frankly, while I don't always agree with our government, and I'm occasionally embarrassed by some of the things that our country has done, I would in no way hesitate to use whatever citizenship or cultural advantages I've received by my birth to further the kingdom of God. Have you ever thought about your own nationality and your own citizenship as an asset to be used in the mission? How did you end up in such an affluent country? Do you think that God likes you better, so He's allowing you to live better than the other 80% of the world? Do you think that He's given you rights and privileges so that you can think of yourself as being superior to other countries or other peoples? No. Our citizenship is a gift that God has given to us, to you, so that you can be an extraordinary influence for God's plan. So you can get to Rome to preach the gospel. Remember a few weeks back we were looking at Acts 23:11. The Lord speaks to Paul one night and He says, hey, don't worry, you're going to be my witness just as you were in Jerusalem. And this leads us right into the third thing of note in Acts 25, 1 through 22. That is, and this is number 3 on the message guide, by the sovereign hand of God, Paul is on his way to Rome. By the sovereign hand of God, Paul is on his way to Rome. Paul had been backed into a corner where the only real option that he had at that point was to appeal to Caesar. But that was really God's way of getting Paul to Rome. They paid for him to go to Rome. And I'm sure that Paul would have much rather have had an old lady in the church come up to him after worship some Sunday and say, "Young man, during my prayers this week, the Lord laid it on my heart to give you an airplane ticket to Rome. Here, take this, and God bless you as you go to share the gospel out at the end of the earth." That would have been the preferable motive, I'm sure. But God, who can see the big picture, the bigger picture, has a completely different plan, a little more risky, a little more circuitous. It's not a direct shot, but in hindsight, obviously God's hand was in this. That which others meant for evil, God turns toward His own good. So don't think that just because God has not given you a direct flight to Rome, that He's not involved in your life. God can use the worst case scenario in your life and use it to work out His plan. Are you in a tough spot right now? You're trying to figure out how something gone so wrong as your life could possibly be good, or God could use it for good. Well, He's got the whole world in His hand. Not just the safe places, not just the good places, not just the comfortable places, not just the most direct route to Rome, but even the road with all the potholes gets worked into His sovereign scheme. Then fourthly, I want you to notice that the essence of the gospel is so foreign that it is really impossible for governments to fully support it. The essence of the gospel is so foreign that it is really impossible for governments to fully support it. Acts 25:19 through 20 provides one of Scripture's best commentaries on the compatibility of government and the gospel. Governor Festus is talking to Herod Agrippa. Herod is the puppet king over part of the Judean area, and he's describing the nature of the conflict between Paul and the Jewish temple leaders. And he says, instead they quibbled with him about their own religion and some dead man named Jesus, who Paul claimed was alive. And then this is the line, "Since I had no idea how to investigate these matters." Since I had no idea how to investigate these matters. I have no idea what to do with this, what they're saying. He couldn't do it. It was not a part of his skill set. It was contrary to the nature of his office and all of the pressures and all of the political push and all the political pull and the necessity to act decisively if he's going to maintain power. He could not do all of that and make a decision about whether Jesus rose from the dead. It just does not work to have government advocating a theological reality. It's been tried on numerous occasions throughout history, and even where there have been temporary states which confess Christian faith, they've never been able to function consistently with that confession, not for very long. The so-called Holy Roman Empire, the Roman Empire eventually, with the Emperor Constantine in the 4th century, he was converted to faith in Jesus. And so he declared that it was a holy empire then. It became the Holy Roman Empire, the Holy Christian Empire after that point. But it was just as barbaric and it was just as unchristian in its quest to maintain power as was the preceding empire. Likewise with the kingdoms of the Middle Ages. Likewise when the popes ended up sliding into political power because of the great vacuum that had occurred in society. And likewise with the Enlightenment and even the democratic experiments, even the modern democracies, there is this unresolvable tension between faith in the risen Christ and the reality of maintaining a political power system. The goals are always going to be bumping heads, even in a democracy. The goals of the kingdom of God, to which we as followers of Jesus owe our first allegiance. That's our primary allegiance. Our goals have to do with pleasing God and participating in His plan for the creation. But the goals of a democracy are to preserve the rights of the individual and to do whatever pleases the most of people. By definition, democracy is about pleasing people, right? Let's take a vote. Do you agree? Democracy is about
pleasing the majority.
Practice democracy. Yeah, it's the majority rules. We've got that ingrained into our mindset. But Christianity is about pleasing God. Now, sometimes there will be overlap between God's goals and the goals of the government. But inevitably, they will at some point clash. Does that mean then that Christians shouldn't participate in the government? No, not at all. Only that there will be times when the Christian politician, and I use that word in a very positive sense, will have to back down from achieving political goals. We need and want Christians who are willing to put up with the pressure and nonsense of civil service. There are great opportunities to be of service on the city council, on the school boards, on the commissions, but there may be at times certain aspects of government service where the Christian will feel uncomfortable and will occasionally not be able to accept or to participate in that process, and will have to recuse him or herself. And we should not be surprised or start to see ourselves, when that happens, we should not see ourselves as victims. Oh, they're persecuting us. It's just a part of the natural tension between running the world as it currently is, the order of necessity, and living by the standards of the resurrection world that is to come. Our first allegiance is to live by the standards of the resurrection world that is to come. That's what molds and develops our thinking, our whole life process. There's a tension between that and the way the world is run now. I put together a bit of a summary sentence on the Christian perspective on government, which is going to be the key point this morning. And I'm sure that perhaps some of you are going to disagree with me. You won't completely embrace my definition. And that's fine. I'm sure that God will correct you when you get home. But I'd like you to at least chew on this for a little bit. Even if you're not into politics, or you think that we'd all be better off with a completely different government, or without any politicians whatsoever, whatever. The fact is that no matter who you are, whether you are very political or apolitical or non-political, this is something that is going to keep coming up in your life. You cannot escape the reality of social governance. Every time you pay taxes, you are engaged in the reality of government. Every time you buy an apple at the grocery store, you are paying taxes and you are engaged in the reality of government. And there is a tension between your faith and your government. So write this down a bit and at least think about it for a bit. A government perspective or a Christian perspective on government. We can't fully embrace it or expect it to embrace us, but we can take advantage of it as a gift from God. We can't fully embrace it or expect it to embrace us, but we can take advantage of it as a gift from God. That is, if necessary, go ahead, appeal to Caesar. But don't expect him to become your best friend. He can't. It's just not the way it works. So, who would like to add a comment, ask a question, or share something along these lines in way of testimony? It all makes perfectly good sense. You're in total agreement. Whew. I've done my job well. Anyone want to comment on this? I thought that people would be hot to talk about politics and government. Excited about it. Throw a barb in at somebody or the other.
Okay, I'll buy it.
Okay. Good, you're wrong. But go ahead.
Well, one of the big issues is trying to reconcile the way governments behave and the way people behave, but especially governments, with our belief that God is in control.
Meaning?
Well, meaning, why is it such a mess if He is in control?
If God was in control, why did the Roman Empire, why was that brutal government allowed to continue?
I'm asking.
Or this is the case study where God turns ultimately the Roman government into a tool for His advancement. Even though He doesn't approve of it, even though Christians would not ever be allowed or considered for military service in the Roman system.
Nor would they want to.
Pardon?
Nor would they want to be.
Nor would they want to be. It was completely contradictory that you would be a part of the government. At least, you would choose that. Now, maybe you started out in that and you became a Christian, then that became another quagmire to work out. But there's always this tension between the world to come and the world as it is. And the life that we live is in that point of tension between those two places. And as soon as we've resolved that tension too well, then we've either tipped one way or the other. So if we've resolved it in terms of saying, oh, he's too heavenly minded to be of any earthly good, or you resolve it and you become too earthly to be of any good to God's kingdom. But it's always going to be that we're taking our values from the future, but we're living them out in the present. And that's going to create the tension. So why does God allow the present to exist? Mystery, but it happened because of the fall. I mean, the world fell apart, and God's in the process of putting it back together, and we anticipate new heaven, new earth, new creation. That's where it's all headed. And we won't have these, the lion and the lamb will be sitting down together at that point.
The lion will be a vegetarian.
That will be the day. That's right, we got it. That will be the day.